I had to get information from you to figure this stuff out. Okay? Because I need to know when was the last time you saw her.
This is the case over the death of Rashelle Brussaw.
You need something? Okay, can I get you some water? Okay.
It's an ordinary October morning in a quiet Ohio neighborhood, the kind of street where nothing ever seems to happen, where neighbors know each other by sight, where a new house represents a fresh start, until suddenly, screaming shatters the calm. A man runs out of the house in panic, yelling that something is wrong, that his partner is not waking up, that she's lying in bed and she's not moving. When police arrive, they find 50-year-old Rashelle Brussaw dead inside the home she had moved into just days earlier. What was supposed to be a dream renovation project has become a crime scene. At first glance, her boyfriend of 26 years, Toby Madden, looks like a grieving partner, disoriented, hysterical, barely able to speak. He claims he slept through the morning. He says contractors were in the house earlier. He insists someone else must have done this. But as investigators begin to look closer, nothing adds up. There is no sign of an intruder. No forced entry, no one else inside the house. What they do find is far more disturbing. Dozens of stab wounds, defensive injuries, evidence that someone tried to clean up blood, and a man whose stories keep changing. As the hours pass, grief gives way to suspicion. The more Toby talks, the deeper the cracks become. Paranoia, past violence, drug use, and a long history of control that few people knew the full extent of. This is not just the story of a murder. It's the story of what happens when years of abuse, obsession, and instability finally explode behind closed doors. This is the story of Toby Madden and the woman who didn't survive the man she spent her life trying to escape. By the time police cars pulled up to the house on Parish Avenue, the street was already awake. Neighbors stood outside in confusion, some still in pajamas, others frozen in place, trying to understand the sound they had just heard. A man had come screaming out of the house, his voice raw with panic. He was yelling that something was wrong, that his wife was dead. Inside the home, officers found 50-year-old Rashelle Brussaw lying on the floor. Her partner of 26 years, Toby Madden, was on top of her attempting CPR. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like a desperate attempt to save someone he loved. But to the first responding officer, it was immediately clear that CPR was pointless. Rashelle was pale, there was blood everywhere, and the injuries were unmistakable. She had been stabbed again and again. The officer pulled Toby off her body. As soon as Rashelle was fully visible, the reality of the scene became impossible to ignore. Her torso and arms were covered in wounds. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was a violent attack. At that moment, officers didn't yet know who had done this. They didn't know when it happened, and they didn't know whether a killer was still inside the house. They cleared every room. No one else was there. The house itself told a strange story. It didn't look lived in yet. Boxes were stacked along the walls. Tools and renovation supplies were scattered throughout the rooms. Rashelle had only been living there for a week. This was supposed to be her fresh start. She and Toby had been together for more than 2 decades. They had raised a daughter together, watched her grow up, and eventually leave home. With their child grown, this house was meant to be the beginning of a quieter chapter, something they could build together. But instead, it became the place where Rashelle died. Neighbors struggled to process what had happened. Many said they had seen the couple working on the house almost every day, moving items in, fixing things, planning the renovation. Nothing about them seemed out of the ordinary. Some recalled seeing Toby earlier that morning. His hair was messy. He looked like someone who had just woken up. No one noticed blood on him, but no one was really looking that closely either. Inside the house, investigators began documenting the scene. The medical examiner would later determine that Rashelle had been stabbed 55 times. Most of the wounds were concentrated in her chest and abdomen. Others were found on her hands and arms, classic defensive injuries. She had fought for her life. The weapon, they believed, was small, something like a foldable knife. Not a large blade, not a kitchen knife, something portable, something easy to carry. That detail mattered. So did the timing. Earlier that morning, gas workers had been scheduled to come to the house to check the gas line. According to records, they arrived around 8 a.m. Rashelle let them inside. They worked in the basement while Toby slept on a couch in the living room. The gas workers stayed for about half an hour. When they left, Rashelle was alive.
I guess they were talking about fixing the gas and the hot water because we didn't have hot water.
Okay. And then what?
I went to sleep.
Okay. And when you woke up, what happened?
I went to sleep.
You heard screaming? Okay.
Sometime after 8:30 a.m., Rashelle was killed. By 10 a.m., Toby was screaming in the street. Investigators took Toby back to the police station. He was emotional, overwhelmed, barely able to sit still. At times he collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Other times he rambled incoherently, jumping from one thought to another. Detectives tried to slow him down, asking simple questions. When was the last time you saw Rashelle alive? Did you hear anything during the morning? Was anyone else in the house? Toby said he had been asleep. He claimed he didn't hear anything unusual. He suggested that maybe the contractors had done something. Maybe someone had come back.
The person was supposed to turn the gas on, but you saw 3 people? You saw... So there were 2 out back.
But when detectives spoke to the gas workers later that day, their story was consistent and calm. They described a normal service call. Nothing was broken. Nothing was disturbed. They remembered seeing Toby asleep and Rashelle moving around the house. They left at 8:30. Whatever happened next did not involve them. Back in the interrogation room, Toby's behavior grew more concerning. He began talking about people being after him, about being followed, about threats that didn't make sense in the context of that morning. He seemed paranoid, disconnected from reality at times. Then detectives discovered something important. Toby had been scheduled to appear in court that very morning for a separate case. He never showed up. A warrant had been issued for his arrest. This wasn't his first encounter with law enforcement. A year earlier, Toby had walked into the Butler County Jail carrying suitcases. He claimed people were after him. He said he had information about drug trafficking and wanted protection. When police searched the bags, they found crystal meth, 11 ounces of it. He had agreed to work as an informant. Then he disappeared. Now, sitting in the interrogation room, that history mattered. Because paranoia, drug use, violence, they form patterns. Police photographed Toby's body. They documented scratches on his arms, chest, and back. Fresh abrasions, marks that looked like they could have been caused during a struggle. They collected his clothes. They searched the house again. In the bathroom sink, investigators noticed faint reddish stains. The sink looked clean, but too clean, as if someone had tried to wash something away. They used a chemical agent to test the area. It lit up. Blood had been there. Elsewhere in the house, they found a Swiss Army knife inside a backpack. It appeared to have been washed. Nearby, they found Toby's jacket with a cut through the fabric, a cut consistent with a blade. Still, Toby denied everything. He insisted he was a victim, that someone else had done this, that people were trying to kill him, that Rashelle had been in danger because of him, not from him. But the evidence was beginning to tell a different story, and investigators were about to hear from someone who knew the truth far better than Toby ever expected: his daughter. By the time detectives sat down with Toby Madden's daughter, the picture surrounding Rashelle's death was already dark, but what she told them would make it even darker. Michaela was 24 years old. She spoke calmly, but there was exhaustion in her voice, the kind that comes from growing up inside chaos. For her, this wasn't just a murder investigation, it was the end of a story she felt had been coming for years. She told investigators that Toby had been abusive for as long as she could remember, physically, emotionally, verbally. Drug use was a constant presence in the household, and meth was at the center of it. When Toby used meth, she said, he became paranoid. He accused Rashelle of cheating. He accused strangers of plotting against him. He accused family members of betrayal. Arguments were frequent. Violence was not unusual. Michaela said Rashelle had tried to leave many times. She described her mother as trapped, afraid to be alone, afraid of what Toby might do if she truly walked away. There were moments when Rashelle stayed with family, times when she tried to rebuild her life. But Toby always found his way back. Like a stray cat, Michaela said, you feed it once, and it keeps returning. The house on Parish Avenue was supposed to be different. Rashelle had secured it with help from family. It was her project, her dream, a chance to start over on her own terms. She was excited about renovations. She talked about the future. Toby wasn't supposed to be there, but he was. Michael told detectives that Toby had been missing for a period of time earlier that year. When he resurfaced, Rashelle kept it quiet. She didn't tell family everything. She didn't want the judgment. She didn't want to hear that she needed to leave again. But fear never left her. Michael said Rashelle had talked about getting a restraining order. She even had a court date. She missed it. That missed court date would haunt everyone. When investigators asked Michaela if she thought Toby was capable of killing her mother, she didn't hesitate. Yes, she told them about violent incidents she had witnessed. Toby attacking her fiancé, hitting him with a vacuum cleaner. Toby threatening to kill Rashelle, talking about cutting people's fingers off, talking about murder casually, repeatedly. She described an upbringing defined by domestic violence. She described a man who never worked, drained money, manipulated Rashelle, and used fear to stay in control. and she described a woman who kept trying to escape. Other family members echoed her story. Toby's cousin told investigators that Toby constantly talked about killing people, that it wasn't a joke, that it was said too often, too casually, to ignore. If it wasn't Rashelle, it would be someone else. This wasn't just anger. This was obsession. Police recovered videos from Toby's phone that backed up what the family was saying. In one recording, Toby ranted aggressively, accusing Rashelle of cheating, screaming at her, threatening to expose her, threatening consequences. The man in those videos was unstable and violent. Back in the interrogation room, detectives confronted Toby with what they were learning. They asked him again about drug use. He admitted he had used meth recently. He admitted he hadn't slept properly in days. He claimed he had been exhausted from working on the house. But when they asked him direct questions, did you wash your hands? Did you try to clean up? Did you scrub anything? His answers became evasive. He didn't remember. He wasn't sure. He didn't know why blood was in the sink. Except blood doesn't appear in sinks by accident. Investigators explained the defensive wounds on Rashelle's hands. They explained that she fought back. They pointed out the scratches on his arms. They showed him the cut in his jacket. They asked him again who else could have done this. He returned to the same story. The gas workers, strangers, people following him. But detectives had already verified every part of that claim. Surveillance footage from a nearby grocery store showed Toby alone the night before. No one following him. No one threatening him. His paranoia wasn't supported by reality. It was supported by meth use. The physical evidence kept stacking up. Blood traces in the bathroom that had been cleaned. A washed knife. A jacket cut by a blade. Defensive wounds on the victim. Scratches on the suspect. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone else was present. And the timeline left no room for an unknown attacker. By the end of the interrogation, Toby still hadn't confessed. But he didn't need to. The evidence spoke for him. He was indicted for murder. At the same time, his unresolved drug charges caught up with him. In court for those charges, Toby took the stand and offered a new version of events, claiming the drugs found earlier weren't his, that they had been planted by people trying to kill him. The jury didn't believe him. He was convicted and sentenced to more than a decade in prison. But Rashelle's case was far from over, because while Toby was serving time for drugs, prosecutors were preparing to put him on trial for murder. And what happened in that courtroom would shock even seasoned legal professionals, because Toby Madden couldn't stop talking, and in the end he would say something that would destroy his own defense. By the time Toby Madden's murder trial finally began, the case against him was already overwhelming, but no one expected that the most damaging evidence wouldn't come from forensic experts, police officers, or even family members. It would come from Toby himself. In the months leading up to trial, his behavior only grew more erratic. He cycled through attorneys at an alarming rate. One after another, public defenders withdrew from the case, citing breakdowns in communication and an inability to effectively represent him. By the time the trial was scheduled, Toby was on his sixth lawyer. At one point, he demanded to represent himself. The judge denied his request for a continuance. Toby argued that he hadn't had enough time to review the evidence. When that request was denied as well, he abruptly reversed course and allowed his attorney to stay on, though it was clear the relationship was fractured beyond repair. From the moment proceedings began, the courtroom felt tense. Rashelle's daughter, Michaela, sat quietly in the gallery. She was set to be the state's first witness. She had already told her story to police. Now she was preparing to tell it to 12 strangers who would decide whether the man she grew up fearing would ever walk free again. Before opening statements even began, something unexpected happened. Toby was brought into the courtroom while the jury was still out. The room was quiet. Legal matters were being handled on the record. Then Toby noticed Michaela. He turned toward her and spoke. What he said was captured on courtroom audio. He told her he was responsible for what happened, that he didn't mean it, that he loved her. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, and it stunned everyone who heard it. When the jury was seated, the prosecutor scrapped his prepared opening statement. Instead, he told them exactly what had just happened. He explained that they would hear the recording during the trial. And they did. Over the next 4 days, the state methodically dismantled Toby's version of events. They walked the jury through the crime scene. The lack of forced entry, the positioning of Rashelle's body, the defensive wounds that showed she fought desperately for her life. They explained the blood evidence, how traces were found in the bathroom sink and on the floor beneath it, how chemical testing revealed blood had been cleaned away, how the knife recovered from the house had been washed. They showed the cut in Toby's jacket and demonstrated how it matched the blade of the Swiss Army knife found inside his backpack. They played surveillance footage from the grocery store that disproved his claims of being followed. They presented testimony from family members, his daughter, his cousin, who described years of abuse, paranoia, and violent threats. They played the videos from Toby's phone, Rants filled with jealousy, accusations, rage, control. They brought in officers who described the scratches on his arms, the inconsistencies in his statements, his inability to explain how so much evidence pointed only to him. Throughout it all, Toby reacted visibly. He sighed loudly, he muttered under his breath, he rolled his eyes, he shook his head when witnesses spoke. At times he laughed inappropriately. He complained to the judge that the jail wouldn't let him shower. The judge reminded him she had no authority over jail policies. On the final day, as closing arguments approached, Toby became increasingly agitated. He interrupted proceedings. He accused his attorney of failing him. He insisted there was evidence the jury hadn't seen. The judge warned him. He didn't stop, as the prosecutor delivered his closing argument, describing the sheer brutality of the attack. 55 stab wounds, each one deliberate. Toby suddenly began speaking again, loudly, out of turn. He demanded the jury look at exhibits again. He accused the state of hiding evidence. He tried to explain himself directly to the jurors. The judge ordered him removed from the courtroom. The jury was ushered out as deputies restrained him. His outburst echoed through the hallways as he was taken away. When the jury returned, deliberations were short. They found Toby Madden guilty of murder and felonious assault.
I just wanted to bring up one item. If you pull up,
Are we being recorded?
We are on the record.
okay, I want to be on record. Can you pull up state exhibit number 66, please? Please? Just pull it up on
Why
here.
don't we go off the record and if something that needs to be on the record?
I don't want this. How come I'm not allowed to have it on record?
They're here.
It's a stick that's on there. I want it to be seen.
Mr. Madden, this isn't a time for you to have a conversation with the gallery.
No, it's not.
Okay, you need to remain silent while we conduct our business.
I know it.
You need to remain quiet while we conduct our business at the bench.
The verdict form was signed by all 12 jurors. At sentencing, the judge imposed a sentence of 15 years to life, adding it to the time he was already serving. Toby would not be eligible for parole for 25 years. He would be nearly 80 years old before he could even ask for release. When given a chance to speak, Toby apologized to his family. Then he contradicted himself. He told the court that he had admitted everything to his lawyer, that he had explained how it happened, that he had taken responsibility. Then, in the same breath, he insisted he hadn't done it. The contradictions were endless. The judge interrupted him and brought the hearing to a close. Toby was taken away. Rashelle Brussaw was finally given justice in a courtroom, but not the kind that brings peace. Nothing could undo the years of abuse. Nothing could restore the life she was trying to rebuild. Her death was not a moment of madness. It was the final act in a long pattern of control, violence, and fear, and it serves as a brutal reminder. When abuse is ignored, minimized, or normalized, it doesn't fade. It escalates, and sometimes it ends exactly like this. In the end, there were no more excuses left to make. No more stories to change, no one else to blame. The evidence had spoken, the jury had spoken, and the courtroom, which had once echoed with Toby Madden's interruptions and accusations, finally fell silent. Rashelle Brussaw was gone, but she was no longer voiceless. The woman who spent years trying to escape control, fear, and violence had finally been heard, not through the words of her killer, but through the facts that could no longer be denied. The defensive wounds on her hands, the blood that had been cleaned away, and when the violence finally reached its breaking point, it was already too late. Toby Madden will spend the rest of his life behind bars, replaying his own words, his own contradictions, and the moment he lost control forever. He entered the courtroom insisting he was misunderstood. He left it condemned by the truth he could never outrun. Rashelle had wanted a fresh start, a home of her own, a future that belonged to her. She never got it, but her story now stands as a warning about ignoring abuse, about minimizing danger, and about the cost of staying silent for too long. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more real stories told with care and depth, consider liking the video and subscribing for more. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and never ignore the signs.